Okay, good afternoon, learners. Welcome to this afternoon's lesson of IT. So I'm Mr. Al Naika. So for today, we're going to continue with arrays. Last week, I know we obviously spent about 3 days doing a past paper. Hopefully that helped you guys quite a bit. Now remember just some rules on how this lesson or how this platform will work. Remember we are using this new software. So what's going to happen is if you do have any questions, you'd obviously send it through. And if the host feels the question is appropriate, then we would have a Q&A session at the end. Okay, so there are some changes with regards to that. We're hoping that it allows us to answer questions as we go ahead. But again, questions will be answered in the last 5 minutes of the lesson. Okay, so let's just continue. So today's topic, what I have planned for you guys is using values at particular positions in an array for calculations. Okay, that was it over there, but let's just move on. So what you should be able to learn in this lesson, you should be able to input and output values in an array. Okay, I'm hoping that's really clear for you guys by now. You should be able to use the mod function. Obviously, you learned about that quite in detail in grade 10, and we're just going to use that function with arrays today. And we're going to talk about understanding a counter and how to use it. And there are some other things that we will be able to talk about today, but let's just get into it. So let's take a look at a question. Now, again, it's these files wouldn't be available on the Google Drive account, but you are welcome to take this down as we go ahead, or when it becomes available on the YouTube channel, you're welcome to view it and try it out. It's a really simple interface. It's just a matter of placing 5 buttons and a memo component. Okay, so what is this project about? It says create a project called array divisible by 3. Okay, we're going to read the entire question first, and then we will come and look at each button individually. So it says create an array called array div 3 to store the 10 values. Okay, input. So that's what we're going to do first, and then I just see that this is a bit 1.3. So 1.3 says input numbers, allow the user to input 10 numbers using the dialog box. Okay, and what you would notice, I hope everyone's looking at this this slide. What you would notice is this screenshot of this presentation. You would see that input numbers is obviously when this program ran. Can you see that display array? This button has been disabled. So that's what we're going to also look at today, how to enable and disable buttons. Now, I'm hoping when we spoke about last week's lessons on the past paper, you guys are quite familiar with how to enable and disable a button. So what happens? Input allows the user to input 10 numbers using a dialog box. Inform the user the array has been populated using a message dialog box, okay, and enable the display array button. Okay, so are we clear with that? That's what's going to happen when we click on the input numbers. Okay, so let's look at what the next questions are. The next part of the question is to display the contents of the array should be displayed to the sample output. In addition, disable the input button. So when the display array button is clicked, obviously the contents should be displayed, but at the same time, the input buttons should be disabled. Okay, 1.5 says the button amount of numbers divisible by 3. This is what I meant with the use of the mod function. So it says determine the amount. Learners note it's not saying determine the numbers, it's saying determine the amount of numbers that are divisible by 3, output accordingly. And 1.6 says the amount of numbers that are not divisible by 3. And finally, the lowest number. Now, I know I rushed through the last few questions, but we're going to start answering it. And then as we go along, we would try to stop and see what we need to understand. So I hope you guys have a screenshot of this so that when we do start programming it in Delphi, we don't have to keep switching through the slides. So again, we're going to create this project called array divisible by 3 and create this array called array div3. Okay, so that's the name of our array, and it's going to store 10 values. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys the Delphi screen. Okay, so we're going to go to Delphi. Okay, so I'm hoping that you can see this. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to declare our array. They said that our array should be called array div3. So I'm going to go to a global declaration. I'm going to declare my array div3 colon. That's just the name of my array. I tried to use something very familiar so that you can see that whatever the question states is what you will call the name of your array. So I'm going to go ahead and say, what data structure are we using? Obviously, the name of our, or the type of data structure is an array. It said that it should allow us to input 10 values. So I'm going to go 1 to 10, and the data type for this array is going to be integer. Okay, so I hope you guys are following. So global declaration of the array, perfect. I'm going to go into the input part of the, or do the input of the numbers. I'm going to read the question to you guys out instead of me keep switching to the PowerPoint. So the question was, in the input button, allow the user to input 10 numbers using a dialog box. Okay, really simple. Obviously, we need to store numbers in the array, and if this is your first lesson, you are joining us with arrays. Obviously, it's advisable that you look at the previous lessons on arrays before trying this out. So the purpose of arrays, as one learner brilliantly mentioned, it is to store values so that it is so that we are able to use it at a later stage. Okay, and obviously, if we're going to store values, multiple values at different positions, we would need a for loop to automate this process. So I'm going to go ahead and create this variable I, which will allow for the for loop to be created. For I is equal to 1 to 10. Take note that the size of the for loop is obviously going to go up to 10 because we want to repeat the dialog box 10 times so that 10 values can be stored in the array. So I hope you are following. So we're going ahead. The question said to allow the user to enter 10 numbers in the array. So again, an array is different from a variable because it stores multiple values. Because it is different from a variable, it needs to be used differently. And how is it used differently? It is used differently with the use of square brackets. That's what makes an array different physically in addition to in a relation rather to a variable. So we're going to send in I because I is the position. Okay, so I hope everyone is up to there following. So we said we want to store the values in the array. How will the values be input? The question said that the values will be input using a dialog box. So remember, string to int, y string to int, because everything comes in as a string and it needs to be converted to an integer so that we can use it for calculations. Okay, I'm going to indicate the word input box to be able to use this component, and I'm going to go ahead and do the code for an input box. So the first part is the title for the input box. I'm just going to go ahead and say number input. Remember, that's the title for the input box. The next set of quotations is for the instruction. So I'm going to say, please enter a number followed by a space. So again, we spoke about the input box on numerous occasions, so I hope that this is nothing new to you guys. So would you agree that that would have got the input for us? But I will continue to read what the question then said. So the question said, allow the user to input 10 numbers using a dialog box, which is perfect. The question then went ahead and said, inform the user the array has been successfully populated. Okay, inform the user that the array has been successfully populated using a message dialog box. Now again, if you have any questions, please note it down, and at the end I will answer as many of those questions as possible. So the question went on to say that you need to inform the user that the array has been populated. I'm going to put a comment over here. I'm going to say, take note where the message dialog box is shown. Okay, take note where the message dialog box is shown. It is shown outside the loop because you don't want to show every time your values have been submitted. You want to, at the end of the 10th value, you want to tell the user all numbers have been successfully populated or stored in the array. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say show message. Okay, and I'm going to say numbers have been successfully stored. Okay, that's just a message dialog box, a show message, really simple. Okay, but then the question went finally, and it said, enable the display array button. So I'm just going to go show you the, I'm just going to go to design view, and it said, if once the values have been entered and stored in the array, then this button here should be enabled. Now I will show you this. If you are trying this example at home later on, what you want to do is you want to give your buttons names, because remember we're going to call up these buttons. So I went to name in the object inspector and I called it btn display. So again, you want to give it, because if you don't, it's going to stay as T button 1 or button 1, and it's not going to be very descriptive when we are calling it up. So again, you want to change the name of it, and I changed mine to btn display. And when you do this at home, you need to disable the button so that by doing code, it is enabled. Okay, I will repeat this. When you're trying to do this at home, you want to disable the button so that the code will be able to enable it. So if you're looking at your screens, I'm going to go to enabled, which is on top here. And can you see I made enabled false? Okay, can you note I made enabled false? Okay, so that's really important when you are doing this, or enabling or disabling a button. Changing the component name and being able to go to enabled and change it to false. So let's go back into input numbers, because they said that once the message has been shown to the, or once the dialog box has been shown to the user that the numbers have been stored, enable the display arrays button. So I'm going to go btn control space to see what the button name is. btn display. I'm assuming you know where btn display came from, and I'm going to say dot enabled. Okay, is equal to true. Okay, please note that. I'm going to put a comment over here. So that is enabling a button. Okay, btn display dot enabled is equal to true. Okay, so hopefully everything looks in order. Let's just go through it one more time. Everyone knows what's that for. The purpose of the for loop. We stored the numbers in the array, and we obviously indicated to the user that the numbers have been stored, and we enabled a button. Now we're going to run this program. Okay, and not showing if you guys, I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but let's go ahead and share that with you. Okay, I'm going to share the executable file with you guys. So what you would notice is that, so let's go ahead. Okay, so you're going to say input numbers, and we're going to use the numbers that were given to us in the sample output. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let's just use any number for now. Obviously, we're going to keep testing our program. So I'm going to say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Those are 10 numbers, agree. Notice the message dialog box that appears. Numbers have been successfully stored. Okay, and remember when we click OK, this button here should be enabled. Can you see it is faded out because obviously it is telling you that you can't click on it. So by clicking this OK, it should give us the it should be enabled. It should. Okay, did you notice that? The button gets enabled. So that's really important. And please, again, it comes out in the papers and you want to note how to do how to be able to enable and disable buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share with you back my Delphi screen. Okay, now let's go to the PowerPoint. Okay, so in the PowerPoint, let's just make sure that we are all following. Okay, in the PowerPoint, let's go. Okay, so we did 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. So 1.4, which says display the array, it says the contents of the array should be displayed according to the sample output. In addition, disable the input button. So when we click this button here, I want it to be displayed like this. Numbers input by user is the message. Okay. Then you're going to use, oh, by the way, we're using a memo component to display our information. So we want to display, or we want to output these 10 numbers that are stored in the array. So obviously it's vertical. Remember from last week's lesson, vertical is really simple. All we're going to do is run a for loop and state the name of the array, and it should be displayed. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and let's do it in Delphi. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. Are we going to do this button? So we're going to go to design. I'm hoping everyone is following. We're going to go to display array. And in display array, we're obviously going to do what the question said, which was for us to display the contents of the array vertically. But remember that it told us to first display the message, your numbers have been entered. Now I'm going to go ahead. We're going to obviously display values stored in the array. Because we're going to display values stored in the array, I'm going to use a for loop. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say for I is equal to 1 to 10, why 10? Because obviously there are 10 numbers that we're going to have to display. So begin, and how simple is this? All we're going to say is the name of the component that we are displaying, which is a memo dot lines dot add is the method, and we want to display the numbers. Now remember, if you want to display the numbers, remember everything comes in as a string data type and everything needs to be sent out as a string data type. So I'm going to say int to string because it needs to be converted to a string before we can display. And I'm going to say the name of the array. Now the array was called array div 3, and because it's an array, it has to be used with square brackets because you're sending in the position. Okay, so that's good. Now you know what's going to happen here, learners? It's going to display the numbers one below another, but we did not display the heading. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and say, put a comment saying, displaying the heading. Really simple. Take note that it was done out of the loop. So really simple. I'm going to display it. I'm going to say mem display, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear this component. Okay, really simple. Dot clear will clear the component for you. So that's quite nice. Again, not compulsory, but it's nice just to make sure you do that. Mem display dot lines dot add. Now this is going to display the heading. Now the heading was your numbers entered are. Okay, so this should be displayed first. Take note that it is not within the loop because you only want to display it at once. So we went ahead, we displayed the numbers, and the last thing that I want to do, remember the question said that you should disable the input button. So that's the last thing that I want to do. I want to disable the input button. Now it's quite nice, and I would advise you not just to learn this in terms of learning arrays, but try to approach or apply this principle to your pet. I mean, you see this in real life applications. If the user doesn't, or if the programmer doesn't want you to enter something, the button would be faded out or it would be disabled. So think about this in a more practical approach or in a real life approach when you're doing your pets as well. Okay, so we're going to disable the input button because why should the user be inputting and displaying at the same time? Once he has clicked on the display button, we can assume that he is happy with the numbers that were stored in the array. So really simple, we want to disable the input button. So btn input dot enabled is equal to false. So the other one, notice it is a Boolean condition. It's either true or it is false. So if you want to enable something, enable is equal to true. But if you want to disable something, obviously enabled is equal to false. So let's go ahead. Let's run this program. Okay, and I'm going to share this with you. Okay, I'm going to share this with you. Divisible by 3. This is what you should see. Okay, so let's do this. Let's run the program. Okay, so we're going to do this. We're going to run our program. We're going to input numbers, and we're going to obviously allow the user. Let's do the input that was given to us in the sample output. Okay, they entered number 12, 30, 45, 66, 9, 60, 78, 98, 10, and 22. Okay, so everyone's happy with this message dialog box saying that numbers have been successfully stored. Okay, notice this button was enabled. So we're going to click on this. Okay, when we click on this, remember the input buttons should be disabled. So I'm going to click on this. Notice your heading. It said your numbers entered are. It displayed the numbers one below each other, and take note that this button was disabled. So again, nothing complicated. We spoke about all this last week, so hopefully that this is nothing new. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to finish off what we had to. Okay. And we're going to go back into the PowerPoint. Okay, when we go back into the PowerPoint, you will see that, so we did 1.4, the display array button. So we did that button and we finished off this other button. Now 1.5, this is what I wanted to, this is what the focus was on today, was for the, or this rather new thing, the amount of numbers divisible by 3. Determine the amount of numbers that are divisible by 3, output accordingly. Now, instead of me keep switching over to the PowerPoint, please take note of what's required for us. So we're going to say the amount of numbers divisible by 3, take note of that. That's what you're going to put before. You're going to say, in this case, the amount of numbers divisible by 3 is 7. But notice we're not just saying 7. We want to say 7 numbers. Okay, so please take note of that. The question asked for you to find the amount of numbers divisible by 3. Determine the amount of numbers that are divisible by 3, output your results accordingly. Now, before we get into the coding, what would we use to determine the number whether it's divisible by 3? Now, we can't use the div function or the slash symbol on the alphanumeric keypad because that's not going to give us the remainder. We have to use a function that is able to see whether the remainder is 0. We need a function that when we divide by 3, the remainder is 0. Okay, I will repeat that. We need to use a function that when we divide by 3, the remainder is 0. So what function would be used for that? It is the mod function. Okay, the mod function is used to test for a remainder. Now notice in this example it is 3. They said check if the numbers are divisible by 3. So what happens if it's divisible by 5, divisible by 10? It's the same principle, learners. All you're going to do is just change the number, but you will still use the mod function. Okay, really importantly, you will still use the mod function. So we're going to switch over to Delphi. Okay, we're going to switch over to Delphi. Okay, so we're going to do this button, which is amount of numbers divisible by 3. So really simple. We're going to do that, and obviously the other one should be quite easy for you to understand. So we need to check where these numbers are. These numbers are obviously stored in an array. We need to obviously use the array. Because we are using the array, we need the for loop. So we're going to say for I is equal to 1 to 10, do begin. Okay, so really simple. Now we want to do some kind of testing to see if the remainder when divided by 3 is 0. Okay, so we're going to check, we're going to divide those numbers by 3 and see if the remainder is 0. And we're going to do this by using the mod function. So I'm going to say if array, because the numbers are stored in this array, remember square brackets. And I'm sure you learned this in grade 10, but just to recap, if array div3 I, that's the name of the array, take note of the mod function, mod 3 equals 0. Now you get a lot of learners who use this function, but they forget to use the equals to 0. Okay, please use equal to 0 because many learners will just say this: if array div square brackets I mod 3. No, learners, remember the mod function is used to check for the remainder. Okay, the way I tell my learners in school is that think of this O over here as being 0, 0 remainder. So that's when you know when to use the mod function. Okay, if I array, if the numbers stored in the array divided by 3 have a remainder of 0, would you agree that it's divisible by 3? For those who are not understanding what we mean by this, let's say, for instance, the user inputs a number like 12. Is 12 divisible by 3? Yes. Why? How do we know that? Because 12 divided by 3 is 4, remainder 0. Okay, so if the remainder is 0, then it is divisible by 3. Now remember the question said that we should count the amount of numbers that are divisible by 3. So I'm going to go ahead and create this variable called I count of 3. I know it's a very long variable, but it's still fine. So what did I do? Let's control X. That should be on this side. Let's just do this. I count div 3. Okay, so that's what's there. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to say I count div 3 is equal to I count. I'm not going to wait to type it out again, plus 1. Or I'm going to put a or yes, if you're watching this later on, you could say inc I count div 3. So you could use either the way I did it or the inc function works perfectly fine. Now learners, it is important that when you use a counter that you assign the variable to 0. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign the variable for the counter to 0. So I'm going to say I count div 3 is equal to 0, and I'm going to put a comment over here. You have to assign a counter variable to 0. Okay, so it's basically saying what would you like to start at, and we're saying start at 0. So that's what that is doing. So I hope that you guys understood what I count div 3 equals 0. And we said if the number is divisible by 3, then I count div 3 is equal to I count div 3, or you could use the inc function, which will increment by 1 each time the value is divisible by 3. Now I'm going to come out and I'm going to display. I'm going to say take note of the display. Okay, can you see where the display is being done? It is done outside the loop. Okay, so we're just going to finish off, and yeah, then we'll obviously continue. We'll do at least one more button, then we'll continue again tomorrow because I still want to answer questions. So again, if there's anything you're not sure of, please just do that so we can have a Q&A in the last 5 minutes. So I'm going to put the message amount of numbers divisible by 3 is. Okay, everyone's happy with that. Notice I put a space over here because if I didn't, it's gonna place the number right against the is, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to convert the number to a string, so int to string, and I'm going to say I count div 3. That's just a counter. You could have called it whatever you want. And learners, note that we also have to put the word numbers at the end. So we're going to look at it one last time. Okay, I'm assuming the bracket. Okay, so let's just have a look at this display one last time. So I said it came out of the loop. Okay, and then it said mem display dot lines dot add, and I said the amount of numbers divisible by 3 is. I left a space because we don't want the numbers to be displayed against right next to the is. We want to leave a space. I sent the number out as a string, and notice I said numbers over here. So we're going to quickly run this program, and we're going to display that, and then we would have 5 minutes of Q&A. So I'm going to share this with you. Okay, I'm going to share this with you. Okay, so you should be able to see that. So we're going to use the input that was given to you in the question, and again, if you're watching it later on YouTube, please do try this example. So finally, for those who didn't catch on, input numbers. We're going to enter the numbers 12, 30, 45, 66, 9, 60, 78, 98, 10, and 22. Okay. The message dialog pops up and says numbers have been successfully stored. We click OK. Remember, this should be enabled. So display array button has been enabled. And remember, when we click this input button should be disabled. So we're going to click that. So notice it displayed your numbers vertically, and take note that the previous button was disabled. Now, when I click this amount of numbers divisible by 3, it should state to me the amount of numbers divisible by 3 is. So notice what it said, the amount of numbers divisible by 3 is 7 numbers. Okay, so please, that's what we spoke about. So please be able to understand that amount of numbers not divisible by 3. I want you to go ahead and try that out at home so that you are familiar with what's required for you for that, or just have an idea or be able to do it on your own. So tomorrow we will correct this button that it says amount of numbers not divisible by 3. It's really simple. And then as well, what you can do after this lesson is done is do the lowest number input by the user. Okay, the lowest number input by the user. So please, learners, please try that out. Okay, and then obviously you'll be able to test your knowledge on whether you understand arrays or not. I will give you a hint though. When you're finding out the lowest number, you need to create a variable called lowest. That's all I will tell you. I know it's not a very good hint, but that's all I will tell you. And then obviously now we're going to go to the Q&A to see if there's any answers for the last 3 or 4 minutes before we conclude this lesson. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you the code as well. I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint. No, let's share the code because we'll have to do that. Okay, and I'm going to see the questions that you guys have. Okay, so Mike says, okay, so let's start with Pramit. Pramit says, wouldn't you have to test the array to see if it has stored exactly 10 numbers for the show message? Pramit, that's how the array would store values. So I'm hoping that that would be answered. You don't need to test to see if it stored it. That's what would happen if you are storing in the array. And if the storing was successful, then only the show message would have been displayed. So again, he asked the question, wouldn't you have to test the array to see if it has stored exactly 10 numbers? No, Pramit, I think that by using the for loop and going by 10, they assume that you do have an idea of how it is storing those values. Mike goes ahead and says, so please may you show me the code for the input numbers button. I missed that part. So by looking at the question and answers, I'm seeing that there's only 2 questions. So I'm going to go back to the code. Okay, we're going to stop the Q&As because I think that's about it. I'm going to go back to the code and I'm going to show Mike. The code for the answers. Okay, so I'm hoping that learners can see this. So we're just going to go through this one last time before we stop for today. So Mike, this is the code that we had to input the numbers into the array. So obviously we ran a loop, and this is what I was trying to indicate, Pramit, that by saying the loop is going to go 10 times, we assume that the user will store 10 numbers. The 10 numbers will be stored into the array. I hope I'm answering that question correctly that you asked. But for Pramit, for Mike that joined us, array div at position I is equal to input box, enter the number. So take note, Mike, that we obviously showed a message saying that the numbers have been successfully stored and we enabled a button. So learners, once we are done with this part of the year, remember for homework, I would like you to, remember it's for your own good that you want to try this out. I would like you to try the amount of numbers not divisible by 3 and the lowest number input by the user. Okay, the amount of numbers not divisible by 3 and the lowest number input by the user. Okay, so thank you for this lesson, for being able to present this lesson to you guys. I will see you again tomorrow at this time. Any questions again with regards to this topic as well, or this question, please have it for tomorrow's lesson, and we will obviously continue with this, and I will address those questions again tomorrow. Thank you, learners. Have a good evening.